I learned a powerful lesson. What if I approach the situation from a perspective of confidence? And confidence is sometimes a good thing, and we like to preach confidence, be confident. But what if I approached this situation from a perspective of confidence and I imposed my confidence on him? What would I have been doing? I would have been isolating somebody essentially from me, but really for no reason. He thinks he's doing the right thing, and I'm incriminating him. Okay, friends, the story begins. We are going to dip into a different tractate today, to the tractate of Rosh Hashanah. If you have the link that I had sent, this is tractate Rosh Hashanah 26b, and then we're going to jump to 27a. The part of the Talmud that we're going to be reading today is actually halacha, not agadata, is strictly instructual, not philosophical. But as we'll see, there is philosophical and meaningful relevance that we're going to dive into and unpack, unbury. And what we're going to explore is the tradition of how the shofar was blown in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. This practice is no longer observed, but it was observed. And what we're going to explore is why and how that is relevant to us today, even though we don't have a Beis Hamikdash and we're not following that practice. But there's deep social and psychological, spiritual relevance that will influence the way we understand our relationship with God, our relationship with people. Let's start on 26a. Sorry, 26b. Did I say 26a? 26b. That's the link that I had sent. It's the middle of the page where it says Mishnah. Mishnah says, so for those who are not familiar, whether you're listening live or not live, the way the Talmud is structured is there is the Mishnah, which is the short bullet point laws that had been ultimately transcribed by the sages. And then there is the Talmud, which is unpacking the application of the Mishnah. It would be like somebody's taking notes and your notes are just bullet points, but now your children, the next generation, got to read your notes and they got to unpack it and debate what it actually is and what does it actually mean? What is the application over here? And that's what a Mishnah is. The Mishnah is the short law. The Talmud, the Gemara, will unpack the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the shofar that was used on Rosh Hashanah in the temple was made from the straight horn of an ibex. Okay. And its mouth, the mouthpiece into which one blows, was plated with gold. Now, Rashi over here points out that why was it straight? Usually the shofar we use on Rosh Hashanah, we make a point that it's curved, right? That it's kafuf, it's bent. But in the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, they made sure to have a straight shofar. What's the reason? There's significance to both. There is value to being curved, to being bent, because it represents a certain level of humility. There's value to being straight, to having simplicity. And apparently in the Beis Hamikdash, simplicity is what we were shooting for. These days, we make a point to have a bent shofar, and the commentaries explain because we want to express humility on Rosh Hashanah because it's the days of awe. But in times of the Beis Hamikdash, says Rashi, having that straight, direct, simple communion, if you will, with God was something that was of incredible value. Now, when we say the mouthpiece was plated with gold, it doesn't mean literally the mouthpiece itself, because then you're not blowing it to the shofar, you're blowing it to a mouthpiece, and it wouldn't be a kosher shofar. But it means basically right on the mouthpiece, but in a way where you're actually blowing into the shofar, not into an actual mouthpiece. The Mishnah then continues and says, there were two trumpets, one on each of the two sides of the person sounding the shofar. The shofar would sound a long blast, whereas the trumpets would sound a short blast, because the mitzvah of the day is with the shofar. So there were trumpets being sounded, there was a shofar being sounded, but priority or prominence, if you will, was given to the shofar because that's really the mitzvah of the day. Okay. The Mishnah then continues to discuss the procedure of blowing shofar on other days other than Rosh Hashanah, such as other fast days, specifically spontaneous fast days, if there was some sort of tragedy going on, such as the Yovel, the Jubilee year, and stuff like that. Let's skip to 27a, please. And we're going to count 12 paragraphs down. Give me a second. The paragraph starts with, it's related that Rav Papa, over there it says Rav Papa Bar Shmuel. The reason why we're starting from over here, up until this point, the Talmud, again, is unpacking that idea in the Mishnah. The Gemara is unpacking that idea in the Mishnah, asks all sorts of questions like, how can you fulfill the obligation of shofar if you have trumpets blowing simultaneously? The Gemara resolves that it wasn't necessarily simultaneous. They were taking turns back and forth. There were intervals. And that itself is a whole discussion. But here's the main point that we need to point out. It's related that Rav Papa Bar Shmuel taught a thought to act in accordance with the Mishnah regarding the details of the shofar and the trumpets. Now, again, this is the Gemara. Where was the Gemara authored? In Babylon, right? In Bavel. The Mishnah, so Rav Papa tried doing this, but Rava said to him, no. They said this only in regard to the temple. So Rav Papa opens up a Mishnah and says, okay, let's do it. Rosh Hashanah is coming up. Let's get our trumpets ready. And Rava tells him, hey, the application of that Mishnah only applies in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple, does not apply outside the temple. This is also taught in the Braisa, which is an earlier teaching. In what case is this statement said? Only in the temple, but in the provinces, anywhere outside the temple, the halacha is as follows. Wherever there are trumpets, for example, on fast days, there is no shofar, and whenever there's a shofar, for example, Rosh Hashanah, there are no trumpets. Similarly, Rav Chalafta established the custom in Sipure, which is a location, as it is described in the Mishnah, and so did Rabbi Hanani ben Tardion in Sichni. And when the matter came before the rabbis, they said that they acted this manner only at the east gates of the temple and at the Temple Mount, but not beyond. What's the reason, by the way? What is there? Where did they get this from? One of the things the Talmud does is unpack the context of the Mishnah, but also sources the Mishnah. How do we know this only applies in the temple, that you blow the shofar together with trumpets, and that it doesn't apply outside the temple? So let's take a look at the next paragraph. Rava said, and some say it was Rav Yehoshua ben Levi. Right, there's a debate in who actually said it. What is the verse from which this is derived? As it is written, with trumpets and the sound of a shofar, make joyful noise before the Lord the King. This is what it says in Psalms. From which it may be inferred, only before the Lord the King, in other words, in the temple, do we need both trumpets and the sound of a shofar. But in general, outside the temple, we do not need both. Okay, so to recap, just real quickly, the Mishnah discusses how the shofar is sounded, and it says that we use a straight edge shofar, not a curved shofar. This is specifically in the Beis HaMikdash. Outside the Beis HaMikdash, and these days, common practice is to have a curved shofar, and we blow it with two trumpets. The Talmud resolves that that is only within the temple, in front of God, in the temple itself. Outside the temple, we don't sound trumpets, and this is the practical halacha as well. If you were to open up the Rambam, Maimonides' compendium of halacha, he writes that in the times of the temple, this is how they would blow the shofar. And these days, we don't do it anymore. And our question for today is why? Everybody knows shofar, you blow the Rosh Hashanah, you blow the shofar. We know that already. But what does the two trumpets have anything to do with anything? It's not explicit in the Torah necessarily. What is the purpose of this practice? Now, granted, the practice isn't relevant to us today on a behavioral level because we're not in the temple. We're not going to be doing that unless Mashiach comes and we attend services in the temple. But the Torah itself, the premise of my question over here is that the Torah itself is eternal. That doesn't mean it's behaviorally eternal. Not everything applies everywhere. But on some level, there's eternality. Is that a word? Eternalness. Help me out, guys. On some level, there is stability. Okay. On
Yeah,
some
I think that's right.
does that work?
Eternality. Yeah, I think that's
Eternality. Okay, we'll
yeah.
go for it.
We'll
On,
we'll send it.
okay, let's do it. On some level,
or
there's
or permanent.
permanence. Okay, that's a good one. On some level, there's permanence to every instruction in the Torah. Again, not always behaviorally. We don't have a base in Mikdash right now. And then, if God forbid Mashiach doesn't come before Rosh Hashanah, we're not sounding that shofar with trumpets. But on a spiritual, psychosocial level, there is eternality to the message behind why we would be sounding the shofar together with trumpets. And our hope in the next few minutes is to unpack those messages. Where do we know about the making of trumpets? That the Jewish people are instructed to construct these trumpets. So if you look back in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, chapter 10, God instructs Moses to instruct the Jewish people to construct trumpets. And there were different types of trumpets. Some were silver, some were gold. And while we're camping in the desert, this is the biblical context of trumpets. While we're camping in the desert, sometimes we'd sound one trumpet, sometimes we'd sound true trumpets. Sometimes it was to gather the Jewish people. Sometimes it was a message of let's march forward, let's keep on going, which makes sense. You have 3 million people traveling in the desert. There's no communication system. Jews were afraid of pagers. No, I'm kidding. Below the belt, I know. Pun intended, no pun intended. But there's no communication system. So trumpets was a very practical way to gather the Jewish people. In fact, the Hebrew word for trumpets, if you look back in the Mishnah, you'll see it's chatzotzrot. What is the root word of chatzotzrot? I just learned this yesterday. I didn't know this. So there's a commentary on the Torah authored in the I think it's late 1800s, maybe early 1900s, by Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch was a leader of the modern German Jewry. And in his commentary, he's very into unpacking the etiology and of words. And he says that the root word of chatzotzros, which is a trumpet, is the word chatzer, courtyard. Because the whole role of these trumpets was to create like a courtyard, was to create this court, was to create this gathering, was to create this environment. You see another example of this, by the way, in this week's Parsha, the Parsha of Vayelech. This is just a parenthetical point, but I think it's worth mentioning. The portion of Vayelech, which talks about the mitzvah of Hakel, of gathering the Jewish people once every 7 years in the Beis Hamikdash. And the Kohanim had to go out and blow shofars. Sorry, not shofars, trumpets. They had to go out and blow trumpets, golden trumpets. The Talmud says any Cohen who doesn't sound that trumpet to gather the Jewish people isn't a Cohen. Doesn't count. He's not a good. He might not be a Cohen, right? He's not doing his role. By gathering the Jewish people with trumpets is an integral part of our history, of our traditions. So I don't know. I'm suggesting that on Rosh Hashanah, the message of the trumpets together with the shofar is a spiritual wake-up call, but the trumpets is let's get together. Let's be one. We're going to be traveling together. We're going to be going on a journey together, if not literally, at least figuratively. But I recently read another explanation. What is the difference between a shofar and a trumpet? A few $100. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. I couldn't hold myself back. What the difference? I just got it. No, the difference between a shofar and a trumpet. A trumpet has a motivating sound, a joyous sound, right? It evokes joy. Shofar is more somber. It evokes a heavier sense of emotion. Shofar is heavy. It's emotional. It's associated with reverence. The trumpets are associated with love, with joy, with motivation. You need both. right? In Judaism, you have what the Zohar calls the two wings of a bird, which is the love and the reverence, the love and the fear. And in order for a relationship to be sustainable, you need both of these. You need, you need kind of this duality. You need to be motivated by love, but you need to be motivated by respect. Relationships need love, but relationships need respect. Which one is more important? I shouldn't say more important. Where do you start? Where do you start in a relationship? The answer is respect. You can't really love somebody properly if you don't respect them. If you don't respect somebody, if somebody doesn't respect somebody, but still loves them, it's very possible that they love themselves. They love the feelings that they have. They love the experience they're getting, but they don't altruistically love that person. You can't love somebody properly. I'm not questioning somebody's feelings, but I'm saying you can't properly, altruistically, selflessly love somebody if you can't accept them for who they are. And that's very tough. Let me phrase it this way. It's very hard to unite with somebody without being able to take a step back and give them a little bit of space first, a little bit of distance first. And you have this structure, by the way, built into the halachic mechanics of relationships in a marriage. The mikvah laws are structured in a way where spouses are together for a certain part of the month and then give each other space in terms of intimacy, to give each other space for a certain part of the month. That space creates a vacuum for more love. That's what the Talmud says. Creates a vacuum to allow connection. But that connection requires space, requires respect, requires reverence. So we have the shofar, which is the reverence. We have the trumpets, which is the love. And in the Beis HaMikdash, both of these were highlighted. But which one was given prime attention? Which one was given prominence? The shofar. Right? The Mishnah, if you look back at the Mishnah, it says that the trumpets were short blasts. The shofar was a long blast because mitzvah tayom b'shofar, because the mitzvah of the day was the shofar. The focus of Rosh Hashanah is reverence, is our reverence for God. Which I think, by the way, is an interesting paradigm shift in how we understand. I was listening to this comedian, Jewish comedian. He says this Jewish New Year's, it's like the day after New Year's for everybody else. We get up and it's like, what did I do? And what's wrong? And what we're introspective. It's like the day after New Year's, right? It's like the day after the secular New Year's, where everybody's all introspective. What happened last night? Rosh Hashanah does have a seriousness to it because the focus of Rosh Hashanah is coronating God, respecting him as our king, which inherently means there's going to be space between us and God, independence between us and God. Ironically, Yom Kippur is the day we celebrate closeness with God, oneness with God. To put it this way, Rosh Hashanah is where we celebrate celebrate the space between us and God that has to be filled with connection. And on Yom Kippur is the actual connection. But in order for that to happen, we have to be honest with ourselves and recognize the distance. It might be an artificial distance, but there is some sort of gap between us and God, between creator and creation. That's the shofar. That's this duality between love and reverence. Another explanation. This is based off a teaching from the Maggid of Mezrich, Rav Doiber of Mezrich. He was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov. So this is going back to the mid 1700s, mid to late 1700s. And here's what he says. You know what chatzotzros are? That's the Hebrew word for trumpets, chatzotzros. He says it's a compound of two words. If you look at the Hebrew, this will be more evident. Chatzi tzurot, half an image or half a form. Chatzotzros, trumpets, are half an image. So he says when the Torah says to make chatzotzros, to sound the chatzotzros, to sound the trumpets, what it's saying is to activate a part of us that only feels like half, and that we need to connect to our other half. A Jew and God, and by the way, a Jew and his or her people, has to see themselves as a half. We're incomplete. We're missing something. In order to feel that we're missing something and to fill that gap with the right thing, it requires bittul. It requires humility. It requires bittul is openness. You know how I like to describe it actually? You know what it really requires? Curiosity. Because somebody who's overly confident ends up being judgmental because I know it all and I'm perfect. And what can I give you? Somebody who is curious, has a little bit of humility, and could say, what can I possibly learn from you? The way I read it this recently from the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, he puts it like this. He says, even if you are, even if you think you're at the top, you're the greatest tzaddik in the world. You're probably not, but even if you think you are, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something to that effect. Even if you think you are, you still have something to learn from somebody else because the Jewish people are one body of people. Even if you think you're the head, there's something you need to gain from the feet that you wouldn't have had on your own. Now, you might not even be the head, right? We have to be honest with what our role is. But even if that were the case, we can't let, no pun intended, you can't let that get to your head. We have to connect with everybody, every single Jew, because every single Jew, and by the way, this is a deeper message than what it says in the Tanya. In the Tanya, in chapter 32 of the Tanya, it says you have to connect with every single Jew because we all have something in common, the soul, where we have a common thread that runs through all of us, and we're really all the same internally. Externally, maybe not, but internally, yes. Over here, it's a different teaching. The Alter Rebbe says it's not just that you have something in common with other people, it's that they have something you don't, because we're one body of people, and the body's connected. And you're not going to have two right arms or two left arms or two left feet. Everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to be completing this bigger body of people. And nobody's being amputated. We're all healthy. We're all necessary. And that's true in our relationship with each other as Jews. It's true in our relationship with God. We're the chatzitzurot. The trumpet's the chatzitzurot. Chatzotzrot, which is the trumpet, translates really as chatzitzurot. We're just half the image because there's another half. The Maggid of Mezrich in this teaching points out that what was the trumpets made out of? There was different trumpets for different occasions, but these trumpets were made out of silver. And the Hebrew word for silver is kesef. In modern Hebrew, kesef means money, but in biblical Hebrew, kesef means silver. Kesef has another meaning in biblical Hebrew. Anybody know? Kesef means to yearn, to desire. I guess kesef, silver, is something people desire, so it's. But this trumpet, why?
Oh, so we always desire money, so that's why it became the word for money.
It's very possible. I don't know that as a fact, but it would make sense, right? That there's that correlation. The the curiosity or openness to realize that there's someone else who could make me whole has to be done with love, with a desire, with a yearning, not just out of duty. Okay, fine, I'll be open to other people in my life. No, it has to be a little bit more meaningful than that. It has to be a little bit more genuine than that. It has to be with a yearning, with a desire. What awakens that level of humility is the respect, the internal respect that we have. What activates that is the shofar. Because the shofar is that cry of the soul that can't be articulated in words. In other contexts, in Hasidic literature, we might call this the yichida of the soul. There's different layers to the soul. Soul has layers. Human beings have layers. We have layers. Right? What's the deepest part of us? The deepest part of you, you know what Dr. Seuss says? Nobody could be youer than you except you. Um, the deepest part of you isn't just your feelings, isn't just the way you think, isn't just what drives you or motivates you. I mean, all these things can change, right? The deepest part of you is the part of you that's unchanging, which is your connection to God, your connection to your people. And the sound of the shofar activates that level of humility that we all need to complete each other. I shared this story before, but I'm going to share it again because I think it's relevant. I think it's very relevant. I'll share with you two stories. Story number one is when I was running camp, summer camp, and training our counselors. And I let them know that, we have a policy in camp that the bathroom doors, the public restrooms, not the stalls, obviously, always have to remain open because I want a counselor to be able to just poke their heads in, make sure no bullying is going on, make sure no vandalism is going on. And if it is going on, if they're be supervising the kids every moment, and if it is going on, then let me know and we'll deal with it. If a bathroom door is closed, the counselor's never going to end up checking, and it could be a safety hazard. And I said, there's going to be that kid who takes the wet paper towels and sticks it to the ceiling and, does all these things. It's just kids are kids. I said, I got to know about it, especially that year we were running camp out of a public school and it wasn't even our own property. And it could have been bad. A couple of weeks in camp, a young counselor runs up to me, Rabbi Josh, the kid who's doing the paper towel shtick. I found him. My sirens start going off and I run to the bathroom. And I said, and I stopped myself in my tracks. I was about to crack down on the kid. I'm like, you know what? Let's approach this a little differently. Let me calm down. And I said, hey, what's going on? Why are you putting those paper towels on the floor? This is a 4-year-old. Try to get into the perspective of a 4-year-old. I'm not even that tall, but I'm looking down at him. He's looking up at me. He says, not everybody can reach the paper towels. I want to put them on the floor so people can come and reach them. Now, it could be he was lying and trying to save himself. And if he was, good for him, because that was pretty good. I bought it, right? But let's assume he wasn't. That's incredible. But I learned a powerful lesson. What if I approach the situation from a perspective of confidence? And confidence is sometimes a good thing, and we like to preach confidence, be confident. But what if I approach this situation from a perspective of confidence? And I'm confident that we're not supposed to be putting paper towels on the floor. I am confident about that. And I imposed my confidence on him. What would I have been doing? I would have been isolating somebody essentially from me, but really for no reason. Because I'm
turning something right. Positive into something negative too, right. Because he thought he was doing the right thing.
Right. He thinks he's doing the right thing, and I'm incriminating him. because I'm confident that this is wrong. But and I'm thankful I did, because I don't always do this, but I try. I approach the situation from a perspective of curiosity, of openness, and that invited me to see a better self of this person. It invited me to see positive intentions. It invited me to learn something, that this kid is trying to be helpful to other people. When we approach people not with confidence, but with curiosity and openness, which is, I think, a code word for bittul, we're creating space in ourselves for those people in our lives. We're creating space for connection. When we approach people with respect, we're creating space for connection. Because part of respect is curiosity, because curiosity implies I don't know everything about you and that you're you and I respect you. I'll share with you one more story. There's a rabbi named Lawrence Kellerman. You can look him up on YouTube. A really interesting speaker. He has great talks. And I was listening to a podcast of him. He was talking about his journey toward embracing Judaism, because he didn't grow up with a strong Jewish education and a strong Jewish involvement. And later in life, he ended up embracing his Judaism, and he ended up becoming a rabbi, and he goes around and teaches, and he's a really interesting guy. He had some sort of degree in like religion study, comparative religion study, and was well versed in King James Bible and the Quran and a lot of heretical things, which he thought as more just academic. Which, by the way, it served him well, because he has interesting classes proving the validity of Judaism from a perspective of social science and comparative religion study. Very interesting talks on YouTube. But he said he had met different rabbis that he had a hard time connecting with. And many of them would say, you got to wash your brain out, buddy. And I get where they're coming from. There's, if when you learn certain things that are heretical and that are not true and that are antithetical to objective truth, it could be harmful to our spiritually harmful. And they were honest with him. You really got to wash your brain out before engaging in your Judaism. But he met one particular rabbi, which he had really connected with, and to this day still connects to. His name was Rabbi Wolbe. This rabbi meets him and he says, "So what did you study in college?" And he's expecting to be a little, kind of reprimanded. And he shares with him what he had studied. And he says, he says in classic English, "Can you share with me a chidush? Can you share with me something new?" He said, "This information is somehow going to help your Torah studies. God didn't send you there for no reason. Maybe I wouldn't advise people studying it, but it happened. It's for a purpose. And I can't wait to hear a chiddush. I can't wait to hear something new and positive, and how this is going to shape your understanding and ability to share and actually teach concrete truth." This Rabbi Wolbe, approached them from a perspective of curiosity, not from a perspective of confidence, a perspective of bittul and respect and openness, not from a perspective of arrogance and isolation. That's the shofar. That's the trumpets. There's more space because there's more room for more connection with more people, connection with God. Okay, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.